can't see names, but I can see that people are starting to join. So as people are coming in, welcome. I will say this a couple times because I know it looks like the number is quickly changing. So
okay, now I see
yeah, now you see it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't think we'll be able to see people, or possibly we may not see names unless questions are asked. But for everyone who's already here, welcome. My name's Alice Coyne. I'm a postdoc currently at Case Western, and I'm here as a member of the SEPI Education and Training Committee, and I'll be serving as the moderator for today's session. Before we get into the content, just because I want to make sure everyone has a chance to join and hear this, I'll just give a couple plugs for SEPI. So as I hope everyone knows, we have a conference coming up in Lausanne, Switzerland, and it's April 21st through 24th. Which I know for most of us who haven't traveled in a while sounds amazing. Hopefully you have a chance to go to that or catch some of the content. We also have lots of plans for more webinars, and there are lots of great webinars already listed on SEPI's website. As in this webinar, if you miss any part of it, will be posted on the website as well, or if you want to watch it again. I see that we still have people joining, but I think I'm going to go ahead and continue. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Jeff E. Harris, who serves as the Director of Counseling at the Aggie Health and Wellness Center at New Mexico State University. He received his PhD in counseling psychology from the Ohio State University in 1990. Dr. Harris is the author of Integrative Multi-Theoretical Psychotherapy, which I'm sure is of great interest to all of us SEPI members. In 2015, Dr. Harris started collaborating with other scholars to define the Unified Psychotherapy as a distinct route to integration. And Dr. Harris has developed training in Unified Psychotherapy, or TUP, as a way to teach therapists to think about clients in a holistic manner and to utilize diverse interventions based on the individual needs of each client. So I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Harris for this webinar. And I just want to end with giving some quick guidance for the webinar format. So I will generally have my camera off, but I'll be monitoring the chat. And so you'll see, I believe, at the bottom of your screen, both a chat and a Q&A function. So the chat function, we will ask that you largely save that for tech issues. You can't hear us, you can't see us. Please let us know through the chat. We'll make sure we address those issues right away. If you have questions for Dr. Harris about the content or the model or something he said in the presentation, please put those in the Q&A. And we have lots of designated points during the presentation where we'll stop and address those questions periodically. You can also wait and then put them in during those moments as well. So I'll be monitoring both the chat and the Q&A. And with that, I believe we can go ahead and get started. So I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Harris and turn it over to him.
Thanks, Alice. So one of the things I like about Zoom is that I'm sitting in my office and I didn't have to get on an airplane or sleep in a hotel last night. One of the things I don't like about presenting on Zoom is it's not very interactive. So I'm gonna ask you in the question and answer thing, just to test that out. If you are in the United States, I want to type in what state you are residing in right now. And if you're from a country outside of the United States, I'd like you to type in the country. And this is just a way. One of the things I like about SEPI is that it is both a national and an international group. So if you could take a quick minute and type in the location. So we've got people from Athens, Greece, California. Hi, Barbara. New Jersey, Turkey, Illinois, Lisbon, Portugal, Colorado, Edmonton, Alberta, up in Canada, the Philippines, New York. Okay, so thank you very much for Spain. So thank you for, giving that kind of broad sample. It's good to have people from around the country and around the world participating today. So I'm gonna, oh, we got somebody from Israel too. So thank you, welcome everybody. So I'm gonna start sharing my PowerPoint slides. Okay, can you see my slides? Alice, can you see my slides?
Yes, all
Okay.
looks good.
Okay, if not, if there's any problems, Alice will pop on and tell me. So the title of my talk today, my webinar today, is Becoming a More Integrative Psychotherapist, an Introduction to Training in Unified Psychotherapy. So today, this is my outline for today. We're going to start by defining unified psychotherapy, and we're going to compare it to other routes of integration. I'm going to be explaining to you a three-tiered model of psychological functioning. I'm going to be presenting a unified framework for individual psychotherapy. I'm going to be describing a unified treatment planning process, and Alice is going to help me with the demonstration. I'm going to do and the unified treatment planning process is based on a multidimensional survey and multi-theoretical conceptualization. And then we're going to conclude by giving you a preview, a commercial for more training this summer. And I'm trying to get my screen and my camera on the same screen. So give me a second for that. Okay, I think that'll work.
Looks good.
Yep. Okay. I was doing the tennis thing. So several of us members of SEPI who all have written books that have kind of a big picture model of psychotherapy started collaborating in 2015, and we had a summit in Cape Cod, and we came up with this definition. Unified psychotherapy seeks to enhance practitioners' capacity to draw from the diversity of approaches, processes, techniques, and research findings by providing an evolving, comprehensive, and holistic framework. So the people that have contributed the most to this idea of unified psychotherapy being a distinct route to integration are Jeffrey Magnavita, Greg Henriques, Andre Marquis, myself, Ken Critchfield, Jack Anchin, Kristen Osborne, and Barbara Ingram. So Barbara is here on today, and she has a great book on clinical case formulation. So I'll give you a plug out for Barbara's book, and we'll talk about how some of these ideas have contributed. So Ian, when the psychotherapy integration movement began, there were three routes to integration: common factors, which emphasizes core ingredients that all psychotherapies share in common; technical eclecticism, which is selecting treatments based on data on what has worked best for others in the past; theoretical integration, which involves synthesizing two or more theories at a deeper level; and assimilative integration. Okay, so those were the first three. And so in the 1992 version of the Handbook of Psychotherapy Integration, there were sections on each of those three. In a chapter that Stan Messer wrote, he first proposed the idea of assimilative integration in 1992 and defined it as a firm grounding in one system and then incorporating techniques from other sources. And so that was so then in the second edition of the Handbook for Psychotherapy Integration, there were two models of assimilative integration proposed. So, but as I said, several of us in SEPI had kind of bigger picture models of psychotherapy that tried to consolidate most of the theories in a big picture and in a bigger framework. And so Barbara Ingram did that, focused on case formulation. My book was a little more focused on interventions. Greg Henriques was a little bit more focused, and and some of the others, Andre and Jeffrey and Jack, all focused a little bit more on how the theories fit together. But we agreed that the idea of unification was a meta-theoretical approach that places theories, techniques, and principles into holistic frameworks. So that's, and we think of unification as a distinct route that is more complex than theoretical integration. So some models of theoretical integration, like Prochaska and Di Clemente's trans-theoretical approach, has kind of that big picture element, and I would consider that a unified model. Other models of theoretical integration, like Paul Wachtel's cyclical psychodynamics, is more a synthesis of a smaller number of theories. So so that's where we are. Those of us who've worked on this idea of unified psychotherapy see it as a distinct route to integration. So one of my ideas that I've talked to some of my other colleagues about is the idea that you can move through different routes of integration as you develop as an integrative psychologist. So, and each of these routes can be used as a different developmental stage. So the first stage might be to build a firm foundation using a common factors approach. And so many of us started with our graduate career in psychology or psychotherapy with a skills class, with a textbook like Alan Ivey or Gerard Egan's or Clara Hill's book. And so many of those are the common factors about building a therapeutic relationship, instilling hope, and those sorts of common factors. So that can be seen as a firm foundation. I would argue that then the second step may be to find your comfort zone, and that may be assimilative integration where you have a home base, but you also have some other interests. After you find a comfort zone, you might want to expand your repertoire, and you might want to use that process of expanding your repertoire might be guided by technical eclecticism. So you say, oh, I haven't worked with panic disorder before. Here's a empirically supported treatment, and I'm going to use these skills and complement my core foundation. Over time, all of us realize how things fit together. When I was an internship training director, lots of people said, oh, I often use psychodynamic views to conceptualize, but I intervene more cognitively. So we all figure out how to fit different theories together. And this works on external part, this works on internal part. This is for people who are highly motivated for change. These theories work better for people who are resistant. So we all naturally fit our pieces together, and so do some of the formal models of theoretical integration. So and then a final stage would be unified psychotherapy, where you can look at the big picture. So obviously not everyone thinks that unified psychotherapy and being able to use ideas from lots of different approaches is the appropriate end state. There's a long tradition that says you should have a firm foundation in at least one theory and not. So this is an idea about kind of the developmental process and how different routes of integration over time and build over time in complexity, so that you can see those on the two axes that are labeled there: development over time and complexity. I have about 10 slides that describe this developmental process in more detail that I'd be happy to share with you. At the end of the presentation today, I'll be sharing my email address and a way to get updates about training in unified psychotherapy, and I'd be happy to send. So if you sign up for updates, I will send out the slightly longer description of this developmental process. So, if you are a member of SEPI or found out about this this webinar through the Society for the Exploration of Psychotherapy Integration, then you are aware that the history of psychotherapy has included a lot of new theories that advocate, don't do that, do this. So I'm going to make this a little bit interactive if we can. So who, no, I'm not, I'll wait. I'm sorry. I wish I could make this more interactive. So one in the middle of the 20th century, people said, don't focus on the unconscious, focus on observable behavior. So behaviorists thought that the psychoanalytic folks focusing on the unconscious was not the right place to focus. A little later, we had systemic people saying, don't focus on individuals. We need to explore family systems and understand how things happen in a more complex social environment. We have people saying we shouldn't just rely on cognitive change, we should focus on emotions. We've had people saying, more recently saying, don't try and change thoughts and feelings, you should accept them. So we have lots of don't do that, do this. I think most of you know that the idea of psychotherapy integration rejects this historical competition and encourages therapists to gradually increase their repertoire of skills over time. So we're trying to say sometimes do this and sometimes do that. So sometimes it's important for me to focus on the unconscious. Sometimes it's important for me to focus on observable behavior. Sometimes I focus on individual functioning. Sometimes I focus on family systems. Sometimes I try and encourage cognitive change. Sometimes I try and encourage emotional change. Sometimes I try and distinguish between thoughts and feelings that should be changed and thoughts and feelings that should be accepted. So hopefully what I'm presenting with you today is that Tupper Training in Unified Psychotherapy provides a method for deciding when and how to focus on different dimensions of functioning. So we have a definition of unified psychotherapy. In the book that I published in 2008, so 14 years ago now, I suggested that there were 5 principles for unified psychotherapy. And I have information about the book, but I'll show you my book. It is out of print now, but it's now been out of print for 3 years, so I can give you free copies without violating free copies of some of the chapters. So if you participate in the webinar series this summer, I'll be sharing copies of some of the chapters now that it's out of print. So the first principle for unified psychotherapy is intentional integration. So where we focus, what we do should be based on purposeful choices. The second principle is about multidimensional integration. We should do our best to try and recognize interactions between different dimensions of functioning and how they interact. Multi-theoretical integration is about utilizing diverse theories to understand clients and guide interventions. Strategy-based integration involves implementing interventions from a diverse sources in an intentional manner. And then relational integration is that the interventions that we use should be implemented within the context of an effective therapeutic relationship. And we know one of the strands of psychotherapy integration has been identifying different relationships that work for different clients. So that John Norcross's work on different types of therapeutic relationships encompasses that idea of relational integration. So when I published a 500-page book, I can summarize my 500-page book in one sentence. Psychotherapy should be intentional, multidimensional, multi-theoretical, strategy-based, and relational. I don't know if it's a good or bad idea that I can summarize the whole book in one sentence, but that's my sentence. Psychotherapy should be intentional, multidimensional, multi-theoretical, strategy-based, and relational. So that's one way of defining unified psychotherapy. Those of us who've written different books would describe it different ways, but those were the ones that I came up with 15 years ago. So so let me ask there. So we've defined unified psychotherapy. Are there any questions or comments? And again, let's use those in the Q&A rather than the chat. So let's, in the Q&A section, please let me know if you have any questions about this definition of unified psychotherapy and how it might look different than other routes to integration. Okay, somebody has asked multidimensional versus multi-theoretical. Okay, that's a good one. So I'm going to pull those two slides back up and talk about that. So, and I think that'll become clear in the next section, but let me try to address that one directly. Okay, so multidimensional is a little bit more about people, our clients, and multi-theoretical is a little bit about the theories. So I'm going to tell you that I'm going to describe a three-tiered model of human functioning that talks about how thoughts, feelings, and actions interact and how they're influenced by external and internal influences. So that's the multidimensional part, that humans are human functioning involves the interaction of lots of different dimensions. So multidimensional is about human functioning, about our clients, and is a way to understand our clients. Then I'm going to tell you that different theories focus on different dimensions. Particularly the interventions focus on different types of change, and that's the multi-theoretical part. So if I have a client who has maladaptive emotions that come from that they learned in their family system, I might use a multi-theoretical approach would be to conceptualize them using both experiential theories like emotion-focused therapy and systemic theories like family systems. So that's the multi-theoretical part. Does that, James, does that end? Okay, James said thanks. So, but that's what we'll be talking about for the next half hour is a multidimensional model of functioning and a multi-theoretical model of psychotherapy. Any other? Okay, so thank you, James, for that question. And I think that that my answer to that question will lead into the next part nicely. Okay. So there are different ways of describing psychological functioning. And on the, I had it on my desk a couple days ago. So, so when I had written my book and started comparing it to Barbara's book and Greg's book and Jeffrey and Jack's book and Andre's book, each of us had 5 to 7 different ways of dividing up human functioning, and each of them were a little different. And so I'd emphasized interpersonal patterns more than unconscious processes. So in my kind of consensus model that I'll be explaining a little bit more at the conference in April, I added I added unconscious processes as something different from interpersonal patterns. Barbara's book talks about, I don't remember her title, but talks about crises and traumas and developmental disruption. So I'm calling that function development across life experiences. So, and then, so of these 9 functions that different models have identified, I've organized them into an immediate psychological experience, external influences, and internal influences. And so we'll go through these one by one. And so this is the multidimensional part of the model. So let's start talking about immediate psychological experience. So I'm going to be encouraging you to think about the interaction between cognition, emotion, and behavior. And I'm going to tell you that for the most part, humans are always thinking, feeling, and acting. And obviously, we know that these 3 dimensions are highly interactive. How we feel impacts how we behave impacts the way we think. So, so one of the important ideas and one of the ways that I first saw the links between these different theories is that cognition, emotion, and behavior, each of those functions, each of those dimensions of functioning can be either adaptive or maladaptive. So that's where I started. I had learned in emotion-focused therapy about the difference between adaptive and maladaptive emotions, and that seemed like a parallel to the cognitive therapy and behavioral therapy. So thoughts can be either functional or dysfunctional. And this, is pretty straight, pretty mainstream cognitive therapy that Aaron Beck has described for many decades. So functional thoughts are accurate and rational. They're based on objective evidence and they serve a useful psychological function. Dysfunctional thoughts are inaccurate or irrational, are not based on evidence, and do not serve a useful function. So I often say, that the accuracy and functionality are a little different. That you can say my boss is a mean jerk, and that may be an accurate thought, but it may not always be functional. In saying my supervisor and I have very different values about the world of work might be a more functional thought than my boss is a mean jerk. So thoughts can be functional or dysfunctional. In a parallel fashion, emotions can be adaptive or maladaptive. And this comes from emotion-focused therapy that Leslie Greenberg has developed and published over the years. So adaptive emotions match the situation in a proportional manner, help synthesize and evaluate situations, and organize people for effective action. Emotions have this adaptive value, but they're not always helpful. So maladaptive emotions do not match the situation, are disproportional responses, result in inaccurate evaluation, or interfere with effective action. So one of the examples that I use is that road rage is a maladaptive emotion. It's probably a secondary response to fear. So when someone, doesn't see you, you're in their blind spot and they change lanes and they almost hit you, the primary adaptive emotion is probably fear, but sometimes the secondary maladaptive emotion is anger and rage. So road rage is an example of a maladaptive emotion that's probably a secondary reaction to a primary reaction of fear. So same in a parallel fashion, same thing with actions, that actions can be effective or ineffective. Effective actions promote adaptation to the current environment, help people meet their needs, attain their goals, or avoid undesirable consequences. So ineffective actions do not result in desired consequences. They interfere with adaptation, or they expend energy without meeting needs or attaining goals. So I work on a college campus. If the way I'm anxious about an exam tomorrow, an adaptive action is to study for my exam tomorrow, and ineffective action is to drink alcohol to deal with my anxiety. So those are examples of adaptive and maladaptive cognitions, emotions, and behaviors. So these are interactive. So this is a personal example. When I was in my early 40s, my wife died and I became a single parent when my daughter was 8. So one of my first thoughts after, and this happened even when my wife was sick before she died, my thought was, I can't do this on my own. I will fail as a single parent. So that was a maladaptive thought. And I could recognize I can't do this on my own was not a functional thought. But I felt hopelessness and fear. And sometimes that fear paralyzed me. And sometimes I would shut down. But I could also recognize that as a maladaptive pattern of thoughts, feelings, and actions. And so on good days, I could pull myself out of it. So the adaptive thought was parenting on my own is going to be more difficult than parenting with a partner, and my daughter needs my support. The more colloquial one was, I probably will not be the worst single parent on the planet. So I may not be the perfect single, parent, but I will not be the worst. So adaptive thoughts like parenting on my own is going to be more difficult. My daughter needs support That's associated with feelings of attachment and love. So even when I was not feeling like moving forward, I knew that my 8-year-old daughter needed my love. And so my love, my feelings of attachment and love, gave me some determination, and I could imagine getting through this slowly over time. And that gave me feelings of hope. And the adaptive action was seeking support, hiring babysitters so I could get some time off, asking friends to support me and my daughter. So this is an example of how adaptive and maladaptive thoughts, feelings, and actions are interactive, and that these ideas of adaptation can be applied in a parallel fashion to cognition, emotion, and behavior. So thoughts are part of a broader cognitive system. So some of the ideas in our field related to the cognitive system are cognitive distortions, irrational beliefs, cognitive schemas, cognitive fusion, narratives. Our colleague Greg Henriques talks about the justification system and talks about justification as being the type of cognition that is unique to humans and how it makes us different from other primates and other mammals. Existential meaning is a cognitive, construct from existential theories. Mindfulness is a cognitive way of being, and imagery is a non-verbal type of cognition. So sometimes we're focusing on cognitive distortions and irrational beliefs in a way that Aaron Beck or Albert Ellis would have taught us, but considering cognition also involves longer types of cognitions like narratives, or non-verbal types of cognition like imagery. So thoughts are part of a broader cognitive system. So emotions are part of a broader experiential affective system. And this broader experiential affective system includes phenomenology, maladaptive emotions, emotional regulation, experiential avoidance, self-actualization, authenticity, awareness and experimentation, motivation, authentic happiness, and spirituality. So you based on your training, you can probably see how some of the theories that you've been exposed to focus on different parts of the experiential affective system. So emotions and feelings are often a foot in the door to a broader sense of phenomenology, and are keys to self-actualization and authentic happiness and so forth. So the third part of immediate psychological experience is actions and the behavioral system. So actions are part of a broader behavioral system, and adaptive behavior is, so the broader behavioral system includes adaptive behavior, conditioned responses, reinforcement and punishment, vicarious learning, problem solving, solutions, committed actions, habits, and skills training. So that's the first part of the three-tiered, that's the first tier of the three-tiered model. One of the things I have recently begun to emphasize more when I'm training psychotherapists is the relationship between exploration, change, and acceptance. So traditional psychotherapies like cognitive therapy often emphasize change. Newer theories like acceptance and commitment therapy or harm reduction acknowledge that some thoughts, feelings, or actions can be accepted rather than modified. And so as an integrative psychologist, we get to help our clients decide which parts of their experience they need to change and they need to accept. Recently, this summer I was working with a college student who he knew he was using cannabis too much. And his kind of change acceptance thing was, I cannot sustain my current use of weed, and I cannot imagine eliminating weed from my life completely. So that's an example of kind of that change and acceptance balance. And some people are going to want more change, and some people are going to want more acceptance. So this is an example from about thoughts, feelings, and actions that could be changed or accepted. And it's specifically about a young adult who is being rejected by his father for his sexual orientation. So if a young gay person, a teenager, an adult, thoughts like there's something wrong with me may need to be changed. We may need to challenge that thought and look at the evidence and help them modify that cognition. However, the thought, my father won't accept my sexual orientation, may be a true statement that may be difficult and upsetting, but may need to be accepted. So some thoughts need to be changed, some needs to be accepted. Same thing with feelings. If this gay client is feeling shame about themselves, we may want to help them change that sense of shame because we think that the shame is maladaptive. However, the anger at the father for rejection, that may be an adaptive emotion, but difficult. And the primary anger might be generating fears of fear. I'm afraid of my anger, but we may need to help them accept and express and explore their anger at their father. So the actions, the way they interact with their family, we may need to help them change. They may need to be more open with some family members and more guarded with others. But some of our clients may say, I'm never going to be as out and vocal about my sexual orientation as my friend so-and-so. I want to be cautious about coming out, especially at work. And that may be an area of action that they need to accept. So again, as we're thinking about different approaches, it's important to think about what thoughts, feelings, and actions we want to help clients change and which ones we want to help them accept. So as we're working with cognition, emotion, behavior, it's important to work interactively. Each of these can become a focus in therapy, and changing one of these areas is going to impact the other two. Our focus may shift over time, but for most clients, working interactively with cognition, emotion, behavior is ideal. So in terms of becoming a more integrative psychotherapist, which is kind of the theme of this presentation today, becoming a more integrative psychotherapist involves an ongoing process of professional development. So you can identify areas for growth that involve rounding out your knowledge and skills. For example, if your graduate training emphasized cognitive and behavioral approaches, it may be helpful for you to increase your competency in working with clients' emotions, and vice versa. So my argument is that a competent integrative psychotherapist can work interactively and focus on each of these three areas. So any questions about immediate psychological functioning in terms of the relationship between cognition, emotion, and behavior? So I'm going to pause there and see if anybody has any questions about the interaction between cognition, emotion, and behavior. Okay, I don't see any questions. So we've talked about immediate psychological experience. So next we're going to talk about external influences. So this model, this framework talks about 4 different types of external influences: development across life experiences, interpersonal patterns, families and other microsystems, and sociocultural macrosystems. And each of these influences and interacts with cognition, emotion, and behavior. So I'm going to go through these one at a time. So development across life experiences includes psychosocial development. So an Ericksonian approach where we have different stages where we have to master different tasks. There's normal developmental transitions like living at home to living on your own. school to work, single to partnered, partnered to kids. There's career life development, role transitions, and then developmental disruptions like trauma, crises, and unexpected losses. So for my daughter, when she lost her mom at 8, that was an unexpected loss that caused a big disruption in her development, and was the formative experience of her childhood, and was probably the formative experience of my adulthood. So sometimes we're focusing on normal development, sometimes we're focusing on developmental transitions, and sometimes we're talking about developmental disruptions. And again, this dimension of functioning wasn't featured in my first book. And I'll cite Barbara Ingram, who's participating today, as being one who kind of highlighted that in her books on case formulation. And one of the things was interesting that I had what I thought was a pretty comprehensive model of psychotherapy. And I knew that I had chickened out about the psychodynamic unconscious focus and focused more on interpersonal. But I started teaching a career counseling class, and I was like, where does career counseling fit in? And this is where it fits in. So career counseling is a specialized form of psychotherapy that focuses on development and helps people facilitate the normal transition from school to work. So that's one way of understanding that. So development across life experience is an overarching long-term influence on the way we think, act, and feel. So interpersonal patterns is the second external influence, and that includes, and the things that we look at related to interpersonal patterns in psychotherapy include relationship patterns, attachment styles, therapeutic alliance, transference, countertransference, the interpersonal theory of personality, which goes back to Harry Stack Sullivan, who in the 50s said, there is no personality apart from interactions. Impact messages is a way that interpersonal people talked about what psychodynamic people would call countertransference. And then interpersonal problem mirrors is from Klerman and Weissman's interpersonal psychotherapy. So these are some of the types of interpersonal patterns that we often, in fact, focus on in psychotherapy. The next external influence is families and other microsystems. So this includes looking at family systems, family roles, multi-generational patterns, family belief systems, homeostasis, other microsystems besides the family, social support, and role transitions. All of those are external influences that systemically influence the way we think, act, and feel. And then the fourth external influence that I want to highlight is our sociocultural macrosystems. So the cultural contexts that we are in, and that may be one or more subculture, but cultural context, other macrosystems. So the distinction between microsystems and macrosystems come from Bronfenbrenner. He also makes a distinction between meso and one other type of system that I'm not recalling right now. But obviously in psychotherapy in the last 30 years, there's been a movement toward looking at cultural constructs like cultural identity, looking at the impacts of oppression and privilege, including racism and sexism, looking at social roles, looking at social problems like poverty, crime, and war, and how they impact psychological development, and then religion as a sociocultural system. So those are 4 external influences. So I'm curious. So this is I'm gonna ask, this is a question that I want you to answer in the question and answer. Which of these external influences do you most often focus in psychotherapy? When you're working with clients, do you more often focus on development across life experiences, which may include, people that specialize in trauma work, interpersonal patterns, families, or cultural more broadly? So let's go ahead and give you a minute to type in one of those in the question and answer section if you choose to. So please take a minute to type in the answer to that question. Which of these 4 external influences do you focus on? So Alice, do you want to read James's comment in the chat?
Sure. So we have it looks like maybe a couple requests to put the options back up for some people.
Oh,
and then
okay.
that's all right. And then we have a question. I work in a university counseling center with a very diverse student body. So I think I switch between, oops, it went away when you were doing that, all 4 at all the time. We also have some answers in the Q&A. It looks like a couple votes for development across life experiences, a couple interpersonals, families and other microsystems so far.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make that a little bit more, more interactive. So I additionally want you to think about which of these you focus on the least, and then I want you to think about whether you have a rationale for these preferences. So one of the things I tell people is that sometimes what we focus on in psychotherapy is a personal preference rather than a firmly grounded practice. So a practice that is firmly grounded in a rationale. So I like to use an experiential approach more than a cognitive or behavioral approach, but I know that a cognitive and behavioral approach is very effective for many of my therapists. So I want you to think about a little bit about where your preferences come from. Okay, so when we were talking about cognition, emotion, and behavior, we were talking about working interactively. So with these internal and external influences, we're thinking about working contextually. So an integrative psychotherapist can focus on different external influences based on the unique experience of the client. But for the most part, we can't have in individual psychotherapy, we don't have a direct way to change these external influences. That may be different if in couples counseling, we are trying to change interpersonal patterns. In family counseling, we are trying to change microsystems. But in individual counseling, we're mostly trying to help clients find more adaptive ways to think about, feel, and act toward their own experiences and the external environments. So if I think differently about my family and say, I want to stay connected, but I need to see my family less often, that is a thought and an action that will change the social system. So we're intervening mostly at the cognitive, behavioral, or experiential level. Alice, is there another question?
This might be a good time to circle back to a question that came up about a little while back from Sean, that was, how do you determine what should be changed and what should be accepted? And I believe that was in reference to the thoughts, yeah, and feelings.
Let me go back to that one. So that's a really good question, and I think that's often done best in exploration with the client. So I saw a client yesterday who had some grief and had a loss. Her grandmother had died in December, and then a friend from high school had died by suicide more recently, and she was a little bit worried about how often she was crying. And should I be crying more or less? And so that's an interesting question. Am I suppressing my emotions, or am I doing okay? And so we talked not overtly about it, change your acceptance, but I certainly made the point that I don't think there's a magic formula for this type of loss results in this much emotion or this much grief or this much crying. And so some of it was that, do you think this is enough for, and what the action that we changed was she was, usually on the weekend, she likes to go for long walks. And we were going to ask her on one of her long walks each weekend to kind of focus on giving her process to grieve. So we didn't say you should be crying every day about these losses, but let's give yourself time to do that. But for the most part, I try to give the decision what to change and what to accept to the clients. And so with substance use, for example, in using an AA model, anyone who has an alcohol problem should be working toward full abstinence. Harm reduction and other more recent things said, no, some people can engage in controlled drinking or and try to reduce the harm. And so that's another example of change or acceptance. Working with substance use, do you want to reduce your use of this chemical and so that we reduce the negative impacts, or do you want to eliminate it completely? And some people, and talk about some people can do controlled drinking, that doesn't work for other people. Let's go. So those are that's an example. So mostly those discussions about change or acceptance should be in dialogue with the clients. Does that help? Okay, Sean said yes, thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. This is not as much fun as talking to people in the same room, but it's what we got. Okay, let me go. So let me catch up with where we were. Okay, so we've talked about immediate psychological experience. We've talked about external influences. So let's talk about internal influences. And so in this model, which is different or similar and different than other models, I've identified unconscious processes, conflicts and defenses, and biology, health, physical health, and maturation as two internal influences that influence the way we think, feel, and act. So from the unconscious part of the internal influence, we look at the unconscious, we look at psychodynamics, we look at internal conflicts between different parts of our unconscious, we look at childhood experiences. This includes structural theory, like Freud's distinction between the id, ego, and superego. This includes looking at defense mechanisms, resistance, and dreams. So these are all things that can become a focus in psychotherapy and are related to how we think, feel, and act on the surface. And so the final internal influence is biology, physical health, and maturation. And this is, was highlighted, the importance of this was highlighted in the biopsychosocial model. It includes psychiatric disorders, looking at physical health. The whole field of health psychology is related to the interaction between physical health and psychological health. This includes sensory motor psychotherapies. It focuses on the mind-body connection. Substance use disorders are an example of that. And there's newer work about using behaviors to activate neurotransmitters. So if I'm riding my bicycle, I'm producing endorphins. And if I'm meditating, I'm trying to increase the supply of serotonin, things like that. So biology and the unconscious are both internal influences on that. So again, I want you to think, and I want to move on. So I'm not going to do this in the chat, but I just want you to think about, do you focus more on the unconscious processes like defense mechanisms or more on biological health? And again, I want to have you think about, do you have a intentional preference for these, or is it more my training program was psychodynamic, or I had a rotation on my internship in health psychology? So a lot of our preferences are based on our experiences. So again, becoming more, an integrative psychotherapist can focus on internal influences when they become closely related to the client's presenting concern. So sometimes defense mechanisms will become a focal dimension. Sometimes biological health will be the focus of exploration and change. So becoming more integrative involves this ongoing process of growth and expansion. So if these areas, these internal influences weren't a big emphasis in your training or experience, these are areas that you can learn more about. So I'm going to conclude this section on the three-tiered model with a graphic depiction of the interaction between cognition, emotion, behavior, and how it's influenced by these 4 external influences and these 2 internal influences. So do you have any questions about the three-tiered model of human functioning? And related to that, do you notice any important constructs that have been left out? So let's look at the Q&A. Okay. Okay, so the next, okay, let me go back to my slides.
Oops, looks like we've got a couple comments coming in. I think there might be a slight delay.
Okay, go ahead, Alice.
So we have, oops, I'm losing one. Okay, having the connection to biology/physical health allows a better integration with what psychiatrists do, which is often considered to be very different than what therapists do, but really isn't. Yeah,
so in the same way that I said couples counseling impacts dyadic, interpersonal patterns, and family therapy does systems, psychiatry interacts directly on biology. But in individual psychotherapy, I don't have a direct impact on physical health, although a psychiatric medication does. But I can in a client says, I want to eat healthier, or I want to go for a walk every night, that's a behavior that influences health. So it's that direct or indirect. So yes, psychiatry is a way to directly intervene in biological health in a way that we have to work through thoughts and feelings and actions in individual psychotherapy.
Great. And then it looks like someone said, I think sometimes it's very difficult to differentiate the 3. So maybe a little bit more said about I'm imagining that's about the model you had up, perhaps? About
the 3 tiers. Yeah, and these are interactive, this is just a way, this is a heuristic model that's helpful, but not absolute. I think I said this to a client yesterday that, I like to think of thoughts and feelings as distinct interactive, but your brain may not know, so people talk about cognitive affective schemes. So I'm afraid of not being good enough. Is that a thought or a feeling? It's probably a cognitive affective scheme. So this is a heuristic model, but it's not absolute. And I don't know that your brain knows the difference between a thought and a feeling at a neurotransmitter cognitive synapse kind of way. So it's just a heuristic. It's not it's not the periodic chart of tables. We cannot count the number of neutrons and protons and electrons. So this is a heuristic. It's not the periodic table of elements. Okay, let's move on to the next section. Thank you for those great questions. Oh, I unshared. Okay, so this three-tiered model of psychological functioning has two primary applications. The first is understanding clients in a holistic manner. And the second one is organizing psychotherapy interventions into a unified framework. So here's the unified framework. So cognitive interventions focus on thoughts in the cognitive system. Experiential interventions focus on emotions in the experiential affective system. Behavioral interventions impact actions in the behavioral system. Developmental interventions explore development across life experiences. Interpersonal interventions impact and explore interpersonal patterns. Systemic interventions focus on families and other microsystems. Cultural interventions focus on sociocultural macrosystems. Psychodynamic interventions explore unconscious processes, conflicts, and defenses. And biological interventions focus on biology, physical health, and maturation. So we've spent the last half hour talking about these different focal dimensions and these different parts of functioning and saying that each of those is a different part of human experience. Now we're saying that as an integrative psychotherapist, I can develop a repertoire of interventions that focus on those. And these theories, cognitive theories, developmental theories, psychodynamic theories, give us both intervention tools and conceptual tools. So this unified framework, we're saying this is a little different than theoretical integration. So this framework does not try to reconcile differences between theories. So Arnold Lazarus didn't like theoretical integration and argued for technical eclecticism because he didn't think that the theories could be smushed. If we had more time, I would talk about how theory smushing is more acceptable in the postmodern constructivist era than it was in the modern era. So the goal of this framework is not to reconcile the differences in a fully synthesized way. So Paul Wachtel has done that in his theoretical synthesis of psychoanalytic behavioral and systems theory. We're not trying to reconcile differences. We're just putting them together on a map. So the framework describes the relative emphasis of different approaches. We're not trying to unify these theories. The unity in the unification or unified framework is the unity is found in human functioning and not in one all-encompassing theory. So that's an idea that Jack Anshin pointed out, the unity is in the human functioning, not in the theories. And I'm suggesting to you that each of these theoretical traditions has something to contribute to our understanding of human functioning and our ability to promote multidimensional adaptation. Do you have any questions about this unified framework for individual psychotherapy? Do you see any important theoretical perspectives or interventions that have been left out or don't fit into this way of organizing our field? So I'm going to go back to that slide, but let me know if you have any questions about the unified framework. Do you see any questions, Alice?
I don't. I see one comment saying it's comprehensive. So I think at least one person thinks not a lot being left out so far. So that's good.
Yeah, and it was funny writing a book, you know, and I remember when I remember the last two paragraphs of the book I wrote were on conversations. And, you know, I'm a psychologist and we think about very individualistic internal models. And I presented the model to a group of social workers, and the social work professor I knew said, "What about the external environment?" I'm like, ooh, that's kind of a big thing to leave out. But I was coming from the theories, and the theories are mostly on, you know, so that's why, you know, So actually in the book, there's a section called "What Did I Leave Out?" and so it's nice developing over time that this is a little bit more comprehensive. And I have this nice chart. Oh, here's the chart about, so this is the the 6 models of unified psychotherapy and then how they all fit together. So, and I'll present this in more depth at the conference. So I have a mini workshop at the conference. So if you want to see this one, I can send this one to you as well, if you want to sign up for updates. So I would like to take a 3-minute break. I would like to go to the bathroom. I encourage you to go to the bathroom or stretch or whatnot. And then we're going to be talking about how to apply this model with unified treatment planning, and Alice is going to be helping with that. So let's take a quick break and I'll see you in 3 minutes.
Looks like maybe you could swap the view. I think
Okay,
we're seeing your presenter view.
okay. I know, is that better?
Well, perfect. While we're waiting for everyone back there to come back, there's a request to see the three-tiered model again.
So
Great.
this one or
Thank
the
you.
unified framework?
I think that was it. We got to thank you when you were
Okay,
on
so
it.
I'm working on the website. So this is the graphic designer, and I don't like the purple circle, so this will be a little spiffier in a little while. But this is, and I've tried a couple. I had one that I designed that had too many arrows and was too confusing, and so this is the current version. But I've already asked him to take out the purple circles, and I just want the green triangle. So the comment about that someone said about it's comprehensive, that is both its strength and its weakness. So, this is really complicated. And that's why most people do not endeavor to try and have a comprehensive view of psychotherapy. So one of the, for a long time in the psychotherapy integration movement, people have said, most of us are integrative by aspiration, but eclectic in practice. And also that's why I think a assimilative integration is the modal way of operating. Most of us have a preferred base foundation and then some add-ons. So the comprehensiveness of this model is its strength and weakness. And you're not going to be able to, even if this is your long-term goal to be an integrative psychotherapist using a unified framework, you're not going to accomplish that in a semester or a year. When I was writing the book, it took me about 6 months to write each chapter. And when I'm writing the biology chapter, boy, I was focusing a lot on biology more than I did a year before or a year after I wrote that chapter. And so you're gonna, if this is your goal to practice integrative psychotherapy in a unified way and have competencies in several different theories, that's not a short-term goal, that's a long-term goal. And most of us are going to be assimilative integrationists with a one kind of base theory and slowly adding on and doing that. That's why I like that, the developmental process. So take your time, there's no hurry, slow and steady wins the race, and no one's ever going to be equally competent and equally comfortable on all 9 of these. But over time, we want to build our competency so that we can make those intentional choices, not based on what your favorite theory that you like to do, but what the client needs most. So
Looks like we have a couple requests to hear the name of your book again,
okay.
and the publisher if possible. But I know, unfortunately, it looks like even used copies are very hard to come by.
Oh, and it's,
Someone said
yeah,
in the chat.
so it's
Yeah.
out of print. And so it's on the last slide. So I'm gonna, let me whip. Okay, we're getting tight on time. So we're gonna do a really quick version of treatment planning. So I'll go ahead and, so here's the reference for the book, Integrative Multi-Theoretical Psychotherapy, Houghton Mifflin. I was really excited that I was published by the same publisher that published Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. If you have a choice between one of those 2 books, read Lord of the Rings. So it's out of print, but it's been out of print 3 years, so I can now give away free chapters. So more important than that is my email address, which is harris62@nmsu.edu. So if you want any chapter from this book, I'll send it to you, or I'll send it to everybody. If you want to participate in the summer training program, let me know. So I've started a Google group called Tupdates, which are updates about TUP, which is training in unified psychotherapy. So but I don't, tupdates@googlegroup.com will not automatically forward. So email me at harris62 and I will sign you up for Tupdates and I'll give you anything I want. So my my book did not make me rich or famous. So I'm happy to be generous, and I'll be Johnny Appleseed rather than Steve Jobs, I guess. So if those are my options, I'm Johnny Appleseed, and I will plant seeds, and some of them will grow. So please email me if you want to keep learning more, and I'll send you anything you want. Okay, so we're going to go through real quickly through treatment planning. So there's 4 steps: conducting a multidimensional survey, establishing an interactive focus, formulating a multi-theoretical conceptualization, and choosing intervention strategies. So, let's just do the demo as we go through. So the first step is looking at dysfunctional thoughts, emotions, and actions. So Alice is going to talk to me about a client that she's seen in the past, but we're going to kind of pretend she's just starting. And that we're treatment planning. So Alice, tell me a little bit about the client who you're thinking about.
All right. So this client is a middle-aged man who identifies as white and with a fluid sexual orientation. He's been married to his wife for approximately 20 years at this point. He also strongly identifies as an evangelical Christian, and he's recently returned to college to complete his degree. This is his 4th try at returning to college, and he's presenting with issues of anxiety, and he received a diagnosis. I'm not sure if I'd have a diagnosis at this point, but of panic disorder and agoraphobia.
Okay.
That's my 1 second update.
Agoraphobia. Okay. Sorry, don't do this at home. Don't do this quickly at home. So that's usually my admonition at this time of. So let's look at his anxiety. Can you give him a pseudonym?
Sure. We'll do John.
John, tell me about what is a typical thought that is associated with John's anxiety.
A typical thought would be, I'm stupid or I'm incompetent. Another would be, I'm losing my mind.
Okay. And I'm stupid, I'm incompetent, I'm losing my mind. And what kinds of emotions are associated with the anxiety?
Fear,
Does
panic,
John know what he's afraid of?
Not at this point.
Okay, and that's actually a classical psychodynamic definition of the difference between fear and anxiety. That anxiety was considered free floating. So so my metaphor is that in the scary movie, when they're playing the scary music and I don't know what is going to attack me, I'm anxious, and then when the killer clown with the big knife jumps out, then I'm scared of this killer clown. So it's important to know that the John is afraid, but he doesn't know what he's afraid of. And then what are some of his actions associated with anxiety?
Almost always avoidance, and so he usually behavioral. He'll leave the situation. So the most extreme avoidance is dropping out of school. So he'll leave the room wherever he is, and he's rarely leaving the house. So
fear is associated with the flight response. So running away and hiding. When I'm scared, I want to run away and hide. So that makes sense. So those are the thoughts, feelings, and actions. And so you look at those. So the next question is, where did this maladaptive pattern come from? Where did John learn to think of himself as stupid and incompetent? Where did he learn to be afraid? Where did he learn to run away and hide from fearful circumstances? Was that learned as a result of one developmental experience? Was it an interpersonal pattern with a formative relationship? Was it from his family? Was it from his broader culture?
Yeah, so I think an interaction across these different areas. So John reported physical and sexual abuse from his father. And he also reported that his mother had a very, very strict moral code. And neither parent was accepting of his sexual orientation. Okay. And so he received the message pretty early on that the way he put it is that his true nature was bad.
Okay, so the my true nature is bad is, is a schema or a core belief,
Yep.
and so that certainly sets you up for a lifetime of hiding and avoiding, because you're trying to hide your true nature. Okay, and so were there internal influences? Were there, so presumably if my true nature is bad, there's some defense mechanisms that you develop. How would you characterize his defense mechanisms?
So I think for him, there were a lot of themes about control. So he would really try to be super over controlled. If I don't, it's like if he didn't hold himself to the highest standards at all times, he'd do something terrible or fall apart. That was the idea. And so,
Okay.
Yeah.
So over control was a defense mechanism to, to hide his true nature, which is bad. Was there a biological component? Did this influence his physical health?
At times, yeah. Not at this presentation, but he mentioned struggling with health in the past, that it would get to the point where he would just kind of totally fall apart. The stress would just be too much.
Yeah, so the stress, the over control is very stressful and energy consuming, and then being at that high level of stress and control, and wears you down. Okay, so the second part of the treatment planning is establishing a focal dimension. So when you were trying to help John change, did you focus more on thoughts, feelings, or actions as a point of clinical leverage?
Yeah, so I think we focused on all of them, but I think
interactively, and that's the right answer.
Yeah.
But was one of them a little bit more the lead?
Yeah, so I think we initially went for the behavior, and so trying to kind of help him stick it out, try new things, not avoid as much as before, and also shifted to cognitive work as well. I think that was a nice fit with his style.
Okay, so the focal dimension in terms of immediate functioning started with behavior and looking at the avoidance, and then moved on to cognitions about I'm stupid, but I'm incompetent, my true nature is bad. Which of the external influences was most salient? And so for me, was it the family system, where the combination of I'm being abused and it's against my mother's moral code, or was it one of those more than the other?
Yeah, it was a combination of family systems, like family of origin and current family. So it was also his relationship with his wife, and really kind of finding a way to integrate his identities and feel open about those. Yeah.
Okay, so I know I'm doing this too fast. I'm sorry. So the third step in unified treatment planning is formulating a multi-theoretical conceptualization. So for Alice's work with John, we would use behavioral. We would start with a behavioral conceptualization about why is he avoiding, and why do people avoid? Because it has a short-term payoff that it reduces anxiety, but there's a long-term cost because you don't finish college when you drop out. So helping him understand, I don't know why I keep running away. Well, let's look at it. The consequences of running away are beneficial in the short run. So that's a behavioral conceptualization related to the avoidant behavior. So that's the first part of the multicultural, multi-theoretical conceptualization. That because this was in the family systems of there's a big secret that my dad's abusing me, and boy, would that violate my mother's moral code. So the systemic thing was a secret. So from using a systems theory, we'd be looking at how he's repeating some of those same family roles, family belief systems, family actions in his current family, of hiding some of his sexual orientation from his wife and from his Christian subculture. So I'm filling in the gaps. Alice would tell me differently. And then the third the fourth part of unified treatment planning is choosing intervention strategies that correspond. So figuring out which behavioral strategies, which cognitive strategies, and which systemic strategies we're going to use. So that's too much information. That's why I hope that you email me with your address. I will send you with your email address. I will send you all of these slides and other stuff if you want them. And then this summer we'll be doing, I'm going to do a 12-part series. Level 1 is in May and June is working interactively with cognition, emotion, behavior. Level 2 in July and August is working contextually with external and internal influences. So again, Harris 62 at NMSU EDU. Do you have any questions about unified treatment planning? Oh, James said, that I mentioned Johnny Appleseed and Tolkien. So yeah.
It looked like we had a raised hand briefly. If you wouldn't mind popping it into the Q&A. I'm not sure if we have time to figure out how to unmute or if we can unmute people.
No, we can't unmute. And we're going to be cut off in 4 minutes. So, so Ed said, this was terrific. Thanks. You're welcome, Ed. Thank you. My colleague Barbara Ingram said, great webinar. So here, while you're typing another question, I'm going to tell you a funny story about Barbara Ingram. The first time I heard Barbara Ingram present at SEPI in Boston a million years ago, 15, 16, 17 years ago, I was for the first 15 minutes of her presentation, it's like, oh my gosh, Barbara and I wrote the same book and hers is coming out a year before mine. But luckily, you know, in the 20th and 30th minute of the presentation, I realized, oh, okay, she's focusing on formulating conceptualization stuff. I'm focused on interventions. But there was a moment of, oh no, Barbara's book is coming out before mine. So, and Barbara says, ha, 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 ha. So. Okay, again, I've had a lovely time sharing my ideas with you. I thank Alice for the support. I'm sorry we didn't have more time to talk about your work with John. Harris 62 at nmsu.edu if you want updates. I'll send you the slides for this presentation. I'll send you my consensus among unified models. I'll send you the developmental model and updates when the website is ready, and then information this summer. You know, if you want to dive more deeply, there'll be opportunities to do that this summer. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Alice. Thank you for participating.